Moving countries can be one of the most exciting and most challenging things you'll ever do. And we're here to take one big worry off your plate: your taxes. At Expat Taxes, we understand the complexities of Irish tax from your perspective as an expat and tailor our advice to your needs. With decades of expertise, our team at Expat Taxes will help you navigate tax residency, cross-border taxation, reliefs and returns, and will work with your country's tax advisor to make sure your taxes are sorted. Whether you're an individual or a corporation coming from Australia, the United States, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to help you. So visit us at expattaxes.ie to book a consultation today, and let's make moving to Ireland easier together.
Welcome to Tax Bites for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money, and stress.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Tax Bites for Expats. Today we are going to speak with Jenny Stein. Jenny is a client of ours and a very interesting character who has explained lots to me about what it's like to be an expat in Ireland. We have a previous episode on this series where we interviewed some clients of ours who had made the move to Ireland, and it was very popular. So we were really keen when Jenny offered to join us because she's going to share her experience of what it was like to move to Ireland, the issues she's encountered, and all the little tips and tricks that you probably want to know if you're in the middle of planning a move here. So Jenny, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you on to speak with us.
Same, it's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Your story is really interesting. Yourself and Tom, we were just talking before we started to record, you have interesting backgrounds, I suppose from a career perspective in terms of where you've lived. Give us a brief rundown of your story and, what brought you to Ireland.
I suppose what brought us to Ireland was my husband's work. He works in film sound. But to back up even further, my work was industrial design. So in the winter of 1992, I moved to Milan, Italy. We went to Milan, Italy, and I got a job there. And because I was working in Italy, then Tom was working on jobs with Tornatore down at Cinecittà in Rome. But it all sort of circles back on itself. It's like this big ball of yarn. Previous to me working as an industrial designer, I had actually worked in film editing and film sound. And so I'd worked with someone named Doug Murray. He had come over to help a small studio get going with post-production sound down in Bray at Ardmore Studios. His wife is Irish, and I had worked with Douglas before back in San Francisco. Anyhow, this company was basically trying to get a toehold in post-production sound by offering an American-style mix. Mm-hmm. Because companies were, film productions, studios were coming over and shooting things like Harry Potter and stuff, mixing it in England, not getting the mix they want, and going back to America to get a proper mix. So they basically felt with Tom, who had won an Oscar for Titanic and another one for Terminator 2, that he would be able to offer an American-style mix. But actually backing up a little bit, they had tried a bunch of different people to come over for a project. And somehow when Tom came, he was that perfect person. Mm-hmm. And so they offered him a full-time job. So if initially we were going back and forth between Milan and San Francisco, we were now going back and forth between Milan, Ireland, and San Francisco. And it became too much. So we actually sold our apartment in San Francisco and weren't there for a few years. And we're just back and forth between Milan and Ireland. And then at a certain point, when I officially left Italy 10 years ago, we resumed going back and forth between San Francisco and Dublin. And now we're both 69, 71. We have just sold our place in San Francisco and are now permanently here in Ireland. So that's a very non-linear, terrible story to describe who we are.
No, it's not. Any story where you just drop the word Oscar into it, Oscar-nominated winner, it's not linear. It's pretty amazing. Okay, I have lots of questions. I suppose What's interesting is for Irish people, some of whom may be listening to this podcast, you said Milan, you said San Francisco, and then you say Bray. Why Ireland? Because, I know there was work, but the work maybe now is not there anymore because you guys are retired. What was it that drew you to Ireland when you had the options of other, obviously, places you could live where you had homes?
Well, we did and we didn't. By the time we started looking for property, we would have been what I call on the road for 12 years. And we were sort of, bungee cording back and forth between San Francisco and Milan, and then now Dublin. We had this desire to just have a little corner of the earth we could call our own. And so, at the time we were living in Dalkey in this wonderful 2-story apartment above the optician in Dalkey. And we started looking, and I drew a radius around, from Bray. And I should have drawn it just a little bit larger than I did because we might have ended up in Animo. But anyhow, that's how we came to end up in Roundwood. We found this place. It took us 9 months to get all the dots connected so that we could buy it. And that was in 2005. And then shortly after, the economy collapsed. The place was worth half as much. It didn't make sense to sell it. So we kept going. And then we started fixing up old buildings. There's a 200-year-old stone cottage and a stone barn and other things. And we just slowly, starting in 2009, started fixing things up. And by then, the what's the motorway called? The ring road, the M50. By then, that was built, which was fantastic because it meant that we could get to the airport easily enough. And even if my heart would love to have been out in the West, I think in the end, this place where we ended up was the best place. We worked with a couple of brothers who are builders, and that made it possible, plus also the ease of going back and forth. So I actually kind of think of it that Ireland somehow took us into its embrace. Like Ireland would have us, and we're happy to be had by Ireland, if that is a better way to say it. But like, of all the places in all the world, how did we end up here? It's just by circumstance, but it fits,
It's funny because we have a lot of clients in a situation similar to yourself, maybe like, they're about to move to Ireland. And the things that we hear regularly are, it's English speaking, it's not far from Europe, but it's equally not that far from the States. It's got access to job markets, it's relatively easy to move here depending on your visa situation. And I'm kind of hearing that maybe for you, it was more just something that happened as opposed to was planned. In terms of the people who are listening to this today and who maybe are making the move, I know you provided some brilliant feedback for us on the recent ebook that we designed about moving to Ireland. What I'm hoping you can kind of share with us is, if you could turn back the clock and you were moving here, or you were sitting with a friend who's planning a move to Ireland, somebody in your situation, maybe in retirement or approaching retirement, what tips would you give them? And particularly if we can distill 3 or 4, that would be really useful for the people who've decided to listen today.
Well, I would say the main thing that I tell people, and that would be irregardless of why they're moving here, is to understand that none of it is rocket science, that every single thing you have to do, whether it's opening a bank account or getting a PPS number, those are all things that whoever I'm speaking to, I say, those are all the things that you've done from when you were a child, opening a savings account, getting your social security number. The only difference is you didn't do them all at once. It's spread out, and but when you start to do it, when you have to do it all at once and they're all intertwined, it can feel overwhelming. But honestly, it's not different.
Did you find the Irish systems more bureaucratic, frustrating, perhaps? I don't know how I expect the system in Milan to be, but like from a US perspective, do you see big differences between how governments administered in Ireland compared to the US?
Well, yeah, but you slid into Italy for a little while. Italy was the most bureaucratic, but it was also the most humane in the sense that if you were trying to do something and the answer was no, like I was trying to renew my papers at one point, the answer was, well, here's an appointment for 3 months from now. And I was actually trying to renew my papers because I had goods coming in that would sit in Naples and incur a storage fee. And it was Christmas, 2 days before Christmas, my parents were here. It was just insane. And in my limited Italian, I basically kept asking, and the person behind the counter basically said, oh, here, go talk to this person. I talked to the next person. explained everything. And then they said, oh, well, here, go talk to this person. And that person said, okay, fine, we'll renew it today. So that sort of thing is very particularly Italian. We haven't bumped into nearly as much of that here in Ireland, in part because I'm now an Italian citizen. And along the way, Tom became an Irish citizen. But I do remember early days, which don't exist anymore, where we were in at 5 a.m. in the morning in long lines of people to renew papers. And this actually happened where 3 people before us, they said, okay, we're only taking 100 people today and we'll see you guys tomorrow. And so we came back tomorrow and went through the whole process. Although in fairness, that first day, I think we started at 8 a.m. and the next day we came back at 5 a.m. And now they've got a whole center in Dublin and they've got, the Wicklow. We also would go to the Wicklow Guard. And it's quite easy and organized and logical and painless.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, what we encountered, I suppose, when we came back from Australia was that a lot of the government systems had become, online based. When we were away, we were gone for 8 years. So PPS numbers can be applied for online. You can apply for other government benefits and services online. So yeah, there's probably been a shift in the last 5 or 10 years towards that. In terms of day-to-day life in Ireland, one of the things I was looking back on that struck me was that you guys have really tried to inculcate yourself into Irish culture. In one of your emails, you mentioned that you guys have learned Irish. That blew me away because most Irish people, we learn it for 12 years and we struggle. It's terrible. It's a tragedy, but we struggle. So you probably have more Irish than I do. What was that? Was that we're here, we want to be part of it, this is what we're going to do? What drove that decision to learn a really hard language?
Well, it was just another one of those things that sort of comes into your field of vision. You say yes. So what we had, this was before COVID started, we had made a reservation out on Inishmain Island for a week for my birthday. And the reason it took so long was basically you really had to do it well in advance. And so it was a very delayed birthday celebration. And it happened to fall in the midst of COVID, which was perfect because to be out there and be isolated and everyone was doing COVID measures was perfect and easy. And it was nice to break away in the middle of COVID. While we were there, we were at the Inishmain Knitting Company and just chatting with someone who was Irish. I don't know how we got onto the subject of language and words, but we did. And she said, oh, you should learn Irish and you can go on Duolingo and you can also join, she mentioned a few sources. And so literally the next day we joined up and I've now been on Duolingo 3 years. So I don't necessarily recommend it as the sole way of learning. There's so many different ways of learning. And I can't speak Irish to save my life, although I'm getting better. You really need to be able to use it. But I've come across a few sources, like the Trailblazery. They do a hedge school, the Scola's Carta. And that is a way to bring Irish alive and make it fun and interesting. And also Irish with Molly, who offers an online course, and she does an Instagram feed every day. And she is absolutely brilliant at making the language interesting and lively and relatable. And so honestly, once I started, I thought, why didn't I think of learning Irish sooner? Because the very first thing I did in moving to Italy, even before I moved to Italy, was to learn the language. But it just never occurred to me. It is impenetrable, but it is so rewarding to understand when people say, the weather is really dirty. That comes from Irish. It's not from English, like if it's a really bad day.
I don't, to me, it's such a lovely thing to see somebody do when they come to Ireland is to try and learn the language, because the reality is on a day-to-day basis, you don't need it to function. You do it by choice. And it's obviously a sign that yourself and Tom have kind of said, we're here now. This is where we are. And we are identifying with the culture locally. Do you find it difficult kind of assimilating with, you guys have been here for many years, but what was it like trying to make friends when you come and you'd lived elsewhere? You obviously had careers, you were busy, but maybe you land in Roundwood, which is not a massive place really. Was it easy to kind of make friends and become part of the community?
I would give you a qualified answer, which is, I don't know if it's easy to make friends because we haven't really made what I would call true friends, but it was easy, very easy to be integrated into the neighborhood in which we moved, which was somewhat rural. In fact, the very first day when we came with the keys, suddenly everyone came out of the woodwork and introduced themselves. And I would say it's very easy to be here in Ireland, especially in rural Ireland. But I wouldn't say we've actually tried to integrate ourselves into Irish culture per se or into the community per se. But having said that, for the last 8 years, I've been part of a beekeeping group here in Ireland. So that certainly keeps me connected with an aspect of the community.
And that's such a good way. Like, I think when you move to a new country, you kind of have this ideal in your head that maybe you'll just bump into people and you'll become friends. And I think the reality is anytime you move to any country, it's when you kind of get involved in something like that, go to a group or go to a community event that you do end up meeting people with similar interests. And that's when friendships can kind of form. But I suppose it's difficult when you're not local and you're in a rural community. Everybody maybe knows each other because they grew up together. And you're potentially not an outsider, but you're not, you don't know the area initially. You're new.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely encourage anyone to join any sort of group because it's that sort of repeated contact that pulls you into the community.
Do you find, is there a big US expat community living in Ireland? Is that something that you see active?
That's a very interesting question because I am not at all involved in that. I know very few Americans. There's one American at the Roundwood stores here in Roundwood where I go and do my shopping, my food shopping. Whereas in Italy, I was very aware of there was the Professional Women's Association and other expat groups that were primarily UK and American. And I'm not aware of that here, although I'm sure it exists, but I don't avail of it the way I did initially when I moved to Italy.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The longer you're somewhere, the less you need those things, I think, to some extent. You had mentioned as well in your emails to me that, you had comments around bringing pets to Ireland, bringing goods, all the things that, retirees can benefit from. Kind of to come back to what we said at the start, any other tips or insight to give people along that practical line of, don't worry about registering for things you need to do it. What was it about moving to Ireland, or what distillation would you have of the wisdom, let's say, of somebody who's been living here and who's moved many times?
That's difficult because you will always bump into something that looks like an obstacle. And then somehow you end up working your way around it. For example, we've shipped things overseas 4 times now. And the last time was our household goods from San Francisco. So you'd think that it would have been easy, household goods, personal items. But then we came across this one category, which was tools. And we were sending over woodworking tools. And we thought, oh, Jesus. But in the end, it was fine. And we also, because we got caught in COVID, we had become resident here. I would say the one thing is to be aware that you have a certain leeway to bring goods in that's based on the date when you have actually flown over here and established your residency. You can't, it's not an open date that can be left forever. It's typically within a year, let's say. And so because we got stuck here with COVID and couldn't fly back and sell the house, there was 2 years had elapsed. And so we ended up writing a letter explaining that, and it was fine.
I think definitely during COVID there was leniency on the tax front. It was limited, but just to come back to your point about the tools, what was the out there? Because I had a client contact me the other day actually who had issues bringing tools into the country. I think customs were trying to claim that he was bringing them in for work purposes, and he's just a hobby he has is to use his tools in his shed. So what was the out there for you? Obviously they were trying to levy customs because of the tools you had.
Well, it was one of those things that was listed, but they never came at us. They never queried us about it. So we slid through.
Okay.
I don't know how.
Let's not ask. What's done is done.
Exactly. But the one thing I would say that could be addressed that maybe hasn't been is if people are coming over to be here for 2 or 3 years and then planning to go back, they end up in a very somewhat different situation, I believe, whereby you can post a bond on the things you bring over and say, I will take them away. I will take them with me when I leave Ireland, and then you get your bond back.
Okay.
And it's revenue's way of making sure you don't bring things over and sell them.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes when we get queries from clients, because we're not experts in that space, there's relocation providers and customs brokers. And, the advice we generally give people is it's worth sometimes paying the fee to get them to help you navigate it, because they can help you at the customs checkpoints. They can help you with paperwork. We had friends in Australia who were importing their personal effects from Ireland to Australia, and they inadvertently put some Irish whiskey in
Yes.
the boxes, and their goods were impounded for weeks by the Australian customs forces, because obviously there needs to be excise paid on that. And this was a completely innocent, let's just pack up our living room, oh, there's a few bottles of Irish whiskey, let's put them in. So something like that, where you've inadvertently not thought of, oh, sugar, what about that? It meant they didn't have their personal goods for weeks and weeks. It was a nightmare for them. I think it's an area that's definitely worth treading carefully if you're inexperienced.
Yes, and I would agree with you that having a broker, paying someone to actually work some of those wrinkles out before you actually get to them, is a good idea, because Ireland is similar. Alcohol is taxed, and you could easily pack up a case of your favorite wines that you've been holding on to when you come over. It's a very innocent mistake to make.
Yeah, very much so.
So we brought over 2 cats from San Francisco to Milan, and we got all the papers and got the rabies shots, and we checked with the airline. And we went to the airline. Tom was working, and I was going to fly with the 2 cats in 2 separate, whatever they're called, cat carriers. And we get to the airport, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't take those cats today." And so. And I don't know what the reasoning was. Like there was someone who's allergic or some other cat, or who knows what. They didn't have room. And so we went home. Tom actually bought a ticket and came with me the next day. We moved my flight around. And we actually went, and we went through Switzerland and then to Milan. And I had the papers, and I walked through waving them to see who would actually check them. And it didn't matter after I'd gone through all of that fuss. So then the cats it's like, oh, let's bring them to Ireland from Milan. And so I went through a similar thing where we got little microchips embedded onto their skin and rabies shots. And I'm not sure at the time if I would have had to have quarantined them because it was UK rules. I don't remember. And the cat who was 17 didn't make it. So I don't actually know the end of that story. But I do know that Ireland and the UK are a little bit, have different rules than other countries. And it's worth looking into.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we had a cat in Australia, and we didn't bring him back because for the reason, the trauma of transporting them all that way and the cost. But yeah, they're little members of your family, and it's definitely something to plan for in advance, because we do have expert on those. But again, you're right. There's rules here around where they can come from and what needs to happen. What surprised you about Ireland? You've been here for time now. What is it that Jenny of 20 years ago wouldn't have realised about life in Ireland? And now she's lived here, she's like, yeah, I didn't realise it would be such and such.
I think the thing that surprised me the most is actually this thing that surprised me 20 years ago. And that is, I very early on came to see Ireland and Italy as sister-brother countries. They're both Catholic. They're both agriculturally based. One is very much physical and surfaces and patina and construction. It's Italy and design and the physical, all of that physicality. And Ireland is completely the opposite. It's a celebration of word and music and storytelling and all the non-physical things that can't be controlled. So they couldn't be controlled by the British, for example. They're the things that you are free always to express. And I think that's what I love about learning Irish now, is that the language is so poetic and so spiritual and so amazing. And so I'm rediscovering that thing that I first felt about Ireland, which is that it's in all of those spoken word, music, storytelling, is this incredible richness.
Oh, that's a lovely thing to bring out. And I think, to be honest, as an Irish person who lived overseas, that's probably one of the things I missed, because, in Australia, I didn't feel that it had its positives, but, everyone loves their home. But Ireland, I think, is a special place in that sense. It's warm, it's rich. And as a population, we enjoy all those things, that we have a lovely heritage, the lands of saints and scholars. Okay, that's really interesting.
Can I add one more thing? So this is the next answer, which is the thing that I absolutely love about Ireland and why I'm so glad that we're here and that the Irish will have us, is that it's a small country and it's nimble, which means that when something happens in the Ukraine, the government immediately says, here, come, we'll give you health cards. We'll find you a place to live. There's no long, drawn out discussion and debating back and forth, as there would be in America, which is a great country. It's a very large country, but it's a very different way of governing. So I am very, very proud to be here in Ireland.
I have to say, it's a great little country. What do you miss about the States?
It's funny. In the early days, it used to be standing on a street corner eating a hot dog. And we would do that whenever we were back. Nowadays, I would say I miss the most wonderful farmers markets that you get, especially in California, but even in Massachusetts, where you have hundreds of farmers gathered selling all sorts of vegetables, meats, fruits, products. I miss that spirit. I miss that wonderful gathering of people and food.
Wow, yeah. Jenny, it's been so lovely to talk to you, and I think even just learn a little bit more about, the why and the how and the what keeps you here. So many people that we talk to, we have them with tax problems. We're not experts in, I suppose, helping people move their lives from one part of the world to the other. But people I really like to hear these stories, because anybody planning the move, they have questions about what they should do, what's going to happen. None of us can predict that, but it's always nice to hear, when someone's gone before you. So thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. Your story's really interesting. I've listened to you all day, to be honest. And you never know. Might have to have you on again for round 2.
Might have to. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Tax Bites for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.